My guest today is Vic Chynoweth, and he's the CEO of Tempo. Tempo builds strategic portfolio management tools, which is the layer where a company's strategy meets the work that actually gets done. So think alignment, strategy deployment, that kind of thing. He came up through finance rather than engineering, including a run as CFO at PlanView. He spent his whole career inside of software companies. He also describes himself as a scaling guy. He thrives at companies that are past the startup phase and into growth mode. We open our conversation on the SaaS-pocalypse, which isn't a theory for Vic, as he's CEO of a larger SaaS company. He's navigating this in real time. I came away with quite the education on things like terminal value, the durable right to win, and why AI is disrupting software company valuations. We also get into where the bottleneck goes once AI takes shipping off the critical path. Vic's view is that it doesn't just disappear, it moves. And then you start finding all the constraints you've been ignoring in planning, in support, and your various other feedback loops. He has an unusual vantage point on that because Tempo sits across a lot of organizations' portfolios at once. The other highlight for me was his approach to leadership. He runs on a small set of deceptively simple frameworks, and he pairs that with a real communication strategy for getting them to take root in an organization, his leadership team, amongst his contributors. This is both a wide-ranging and valuable conversation, as it comes from a rare perspective that I don't get to sit with that often. It filled in a part of the picture of what's happening in software right now that I think a lot of us are missing. This is episode 8 of Hard Boiled Software with Vic Chynoweth. Welcome, Vic Chynoweth, to the Hard Boiled Software podcast. Great to have you here today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, David.
You know, we met at a event in which we were kind of mutual speakers. I was moderating a panel, but similar thing. And we got to talking about a number of things. I'm like, will you please come on the podcast? We like to start these things off with a bit of an origin story. So you have a kind of a fun and unique background with a bunch of interesting names on it. I'd love to just kind of dig into how you got into, becoming a SaaS CEO. What were the kind of stepping stones or branches in the journey that kind of led you to where you are now?
It's sort of a direct path from biology undergrad to software CEO. Sort of an obvious path, I sort of think about it, right?
Yeah, right.
Great question. So I started off in biology undergrad, was going to go into the medical world, decided against that after getting a little bit more exposure to it, and ended up oriented towards probably more of my powers, which is really around finance. So between undergrad and grad school, I'd end up starting a company, which was really exciting and interesting, but also helping recognize what I like to do, what I really prefer to do versus what I'm adequate at. I'm adequate from an entrepreneurship perspective, but I'm closer to great when it comes to scaling things, so kind of larger scale stuff. And so was able to attend grad school and then had lots of interesting opportunities to kind of be thrown to the fire, I'm going to call it, and accelerate my own kind of experience set, starting with Cray supercomputing, probably one of the best experiences of my life, one of the hardest experiences at the same time. It was a really interesting time there. We kind of went from potentially like not going to make it, like going concern issue, to ultimately that company thrived for a couple decades after I left, and HP bought it a handful of years ago. From there, I went into the private equity world, which I didn't really know anything about at the time, but private equity software. And that's really where my software path began. And I did it on the finance and operations side, but really with a kind of find where the biggest issues are and step in and try to help support making whatever needs to happen. Having been from that CFO or finance side of the organization work, finance is typically a connector organization, which means we kind of have an open door to anything. But we've got to add value, find places to add value and add that value, partner with folks, get to know each other, their businesses. And that's probably where I learned the most important thing for me to become ultimately a CEO, which is really about empathy. The objective, I think, at the highest end in finance is to be a great partner. To be a great partner, you have to empathize. You got to put yourself in your partner's shoes, whether it's the CRO or CTO or CIO or whatever it is. And go, hey, ask the question of what would I do if I was in that role? What would I need to make decisions if I was in that role? And then bring those to the table, those things to the table, the data in the right form at the right time, typically visually. Like I can read columns and rows sometimes and make sense of it, but it's a heck of a lot easier if it's visual. Up and to the right's good, typically. Down
Yep.
and to the right's bad, so on and so forth. And so that was really like what got me in that direction. I worked closely with every function and got to empathize and really think about every one of those functions. And then working at a private equity firm for a few years kind of rounded that out because I was essentially a coach to the CEO and usually one or two other executives. And with that lens, kind of gave me multiple at bats. And then it made sense to go do the CEO role thereafter. And I really enjoy it at Tempo.
Yeah. I really love what you're describing here is your kind of shift from CFO to CEO to coaching partner at a PE firm. And one of the things we kind of run into quite a bit is I, I won't call it dysfunction because I'm not in the group and I think it's a little much from outside of the group to call it that. But I will say, this concept that like teams are only a contributor layer thing. I mean, certainly we have teams kind of operating at every flight level of the group. And I'm just wondering if you have any kind of wisdom for, I guess the customer empathy or the kind of putting yourself in the shoes of other chiefs, right, in that group or other leaders in that group. What other words of wisdom do you have around kind of getting that group to function as a team that's able to kind of achieve a whole greater than the sum of its parts?
So ultimately, I want everyone to be able to empathize with whoever is upstream, downstream, or sideways from them. There's different constructs to try to establish that. What I've found from a teaming perspective is the first thing I try to do there is visibility and alignment. And so I have these axioms, I call them leadership axioms, and that's the first one, visibility and alignment. Without visibility, we can't be aligned. Without alignment, we're going to go in different directions. And as companies scale, as organizations scale, visibility and alignment gets harder. You have to be more proactive at how you do it. AI is interesting because it's making it easier because you can just push it now in a more automated way with intelligence. There's a whole bunch you could do there. Visibility and alignment, without it, it's really hard to do anything else because David, if you think we're going north and I think we're going east, we're not going to get to where we want to get to. And unless it's northeast, then we might be okay. So I try to do this with frameworks that allows people to kind of take that framework, make it their own, but we get to a place that we all want to get to together. So that sticking with that axiom, visibility and alignment. And so, all right, now we have it's transparency kind of fits in that. Once we have visibility and alignment, we then go, all right, accountability and support. David and you and I both know what we need to do. We have visibility and alignment. I'm going to hold myself accountable. You're going to hold yourself accountable. And then we have the right to hold each other accountable. But at the same time, we're going to support each other. The faster a business moves, the more mistakes are going to be made. And that's okay, as long as we're aware of it and we're supporting of it. Now, it's not one of these things where you repeat the same mistake over and over and it's forgotten. There is accountability, but we want to be able to fail fast, fail safe, and learn from those mistakes. So visibility and alignment, accountability and support. Once we have those, enable and empower. So again, as you scale organizations, you have to enable everybody with how we make decisions. What are the decision-making frameworks? Start with values as an example, strategy of the company as an example, but also 2x2 data representations. There's first principles by function, things like that. But we want to enable and then empower decision-making. Without the enablement, empowered decision-making is not great because somebody's going to be empowered to make decisions without the know-how to do that. As long as we've enabled folks with similar ways of doing things, then we're going to get to decisions that we're all generally going to be aligned with 80+% of the time. So that's the type of framework that I've found to be useful. The last thing I'll mention on this topic is my philosophy of kind of anything, and I learned this a long time ago, is I want to not be needed. Whatever it is I'm working on, I need to go, how do I not be needed for that? Because there's always a backlog of things that we want to then go do. And so I try to encourage that with leadership. I try to encourage it across the vast majority of an organization. Easier for some folks in levels than others. But certainly at a management and leadership perspective, the objective is to not be needed. And that's different. Like historically, I've seen lots of folks would hold on to data or information so that they're needed because of that. So that's not an enduring approach to leadership or management.
Yeah. I think we're seeing a lot of that in the AI era where people's kind of identities are attached a little bit to the task layer, maybe not the purpose layer so much. So I'm really glad you brought that up as kind of a leadership first principle. Like what is the purpose, and am I fusing that with people with that so that they can make choices around the tasks and what to do with that. Awesome. So okay, let's get into a contemporary topic. And this is something that maybe you all are feeling a little bit at Tempo, or you're certainly seeing, in your community and, the people that you kind of traveled with into the position that you're on right now. But like the SaaS-pocalypse is happening and everything is kind of going haywire now in terms of, software as a service, B2B, valuations, and we could see what's happening. I'm not going to name names, but everyone kind of knows, like all these kind of, platforms and SaaS tooling, the, public companies of stock prices are going way down. I would just kind of love your hot take as someone that is firmly in that space and has spent a ton of time in that space. Like, what's happening from your vantage point in the contemporary SaaS landscape?
So, really interesting and topical question. So, my perspective, is similar to what I've seen from others in the industry. So, there's nothing here I'm going to share that it's just like, hey, this is brand new, breaking from Vic kind of thing. But it's a combination of experience and things I've heard from others as well, and those things coming together. But it's essentially at the core of it, what AI does is it puts into question any software company's durable right to win. And that durable right to win is really the long-term sustaining ability for that company to continue to generate cash flow. And so that then has an implication on valuation, because if companies don't have a durable right to win, or that durable right to win is in question, what becomes in question immediately thereafter is the terminal value element of any company's valuation. And if you look at most companies, especially most software companies, particularly higher growth, which means typically lower profit, a huge amount of valuation sits in that terminal value calculation. It's typically done like in a model, like year 10, we go, hey, company's going to grow to X in 10 years. And then it's going to persist from there at 4% growth into perpetuity, and you get a terminal value. Well, if that durable right to win is in question, that puts in question, is that company even get to 10 years? Is there any value
Right.
in terminal value? In which case, how do we think about valuation now? If we discount materially, maybe even to zero in some instances, that terminal value. I think this is what the markets are struggling with, and it's probably more pronounced, I think, in private markets, private equity markets specifically, even more so than it is in public markets. But you're certainly seeing it in public markets with lots of big names that have come down in 50% plus in valuation for the last 12 months, probably more precipitously in the last 6 months. And so it's really that terminal value question. And I don't think we're at the bottom of that just yet. And it'll likely play out different by vertical, horizontal, so on and so forth, how much exposure folks have to being disrupted, because AI just gives companies the ability to go disrupt something that they would have a harder time historically disrupting.
Right. Right. So the number one cost driver, right, in software intensive business would be labor, right? And so the idea is that expense goes down, therefore changing the kind of economics of the valuation terminal value. Is that a reasonable paraphrase?
Um, Not quite. Essentially, what happens is the durable right to win goes down. So where I'm at, just say I'm at $1 billion in revenue today, and I'm growing at 20%, but I'm not making any money, or I'm growing at 50%, I'm not making any money. I don't right now. All my valuation is in terminal value because I discounted cash flow is zero today, or it's that in the future. If I put into question my ability to continue to win like that, or to even exist in 10 years, instead of that terminal value driving 80% of my value, 80% could just go away instantaneously, maybe even a little bit more if it's less than 10 years. So what AI puts into question, again, is that right? Durable right to win. Therefore, your right to exist at all in 5, 10, 15 years. And so is there anything in that terminal value that puts people into defaulting of like nearer term cash flow is what I'm going to value off? Well, all of a sudden, instead of 10 times revenue or 25 times EBITDA, you're going to be more, I don't know what the number is, less than 5 times revenue and less than 15 or 10 times earnings, probably less than 10 times earnings. And that's an extreme example. But there are some companies that will fall into that extreme example because AI does enable somebody to replace them pretty easily. There's lots of companies that aren't that way. And I think the market's trying to figure out which ones fit in which arena.
Yeah, I've been reading kind of the one possible way to look at this is like systems of record. You know, I think like your Jiras of the world, I think arguably Tempo, I think like a lot of the data that you're working with is kind of the system of record versus like point solutions. It looks like point solutions are particularly in the crosshairs for this kind of change, whereas systems of record seem to be just based on weak signals and news and press releases and like it seems like they're doing hard pivots toward becoming more kind of AI native. Is that a reasonable interpretation of current events?
I think that's probably fair. Definitely the smaller your value kind of orientation is, the easy, which means less technical difficulty to build or replace
Right.
that thing. You have less of a moat. When you're a system of record, you own the data, so to speak, which means you have more of a moat. Typically, those moats are going to be in data, because you need data to actually feed any sort of AI or LLM. Context. And so, great, I've got data, but with no context, what do I do with that? And so you've got a kind of a battle for folks to go establish the context element of a right to win that's sustainable. And then there's others that are a little bit like more skill. Like if you look at security, that's probably more entrenched. It's probably the most questioned too. Like if you ask me, like the biggest concern I have in AI is security, particularly when you combine the combination of what we see with what we're hearing and seeing about Mythos, right, which is I'm sure you and the audience are probably aware, but it's Anthropic's next version of Claude. And then even if you look at like the movie The Thinking Game, right, which is about DeepMind, like essentially what DeepMind was, which is one of the earliest AGIs, that among other things, it's a code-breaking behemoth. Like essentially what it did with the protein folding problem is it broke a code that was unbreakable.
Yeah, I did. I actually recently saw that. It was great. So I wonder too, like, and this is maybe we're just kind of engaging a little bit of speculation, but that's okay. It's a podcast. I wonder if there's just kind of if we're experiencing a recoining of the realm event. And by that I mean, as new solutions crop up that are AI native business models that kind of take full advantage of this technology and have the organizational design to deal with the kind of compressed, just the volatility around change and stuff like that, there becomes a new kind of wave of software, right? A new wave of providers. And in that wave, if we kind of tie it back to what you're saying about durability, right to win, durable right to win, and you're saying about terminal value, do those economic principles become refreshed with that recoining of the realm? That is, are they durable in of themselves, or are you thinking there might just be new calculus that emerges from this?
I suggest that they will be refreshed. I think the question right now is what survives the kind of AI ingestion or AI displacement that is occurring right now. And as we get through that, I suspect that we return to something similar, but it'll be relative to those survivors. And you may have now all of a sudden quadrants. Hey, these are the ones that are the most durable right to win. This is the next level of durable right to win, so on and so forth. So you're going to get relative valuation discounts based on the perception of that durability of ability to win and that market to sustain.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I'm getting an education here, Vic. Thank you so much. I really, I want to kind of take this economic discussion, and grind it a little bit into not grind it, ground it a little bit into,
We can grind it
our,
and ground it.
we can grind and ground. No, yep, nothing to say we can work in any tense we want. But like it for a kind of software engineering leader, right? What do you kind of think is the importance or the legitimacy of like the dimension of economics that we're talking about? Like what should like a someone that's acting strategically in an engineering group, what should they know? Like what do you like to see them coming to you with in terms of business cases or understanding of, the larger industrial landscape or competitors? Like what should like your kind of average director of engineering know in terms of this kind of economic theory, and what would you hope to see as someone you work with?
I don't know that this economic theory is something that's going to be terribly helpful to folks on a day-to-day basis. The thing I want people to know is that, and get comfortable with, is that our way of working has changed. AI has fundamentally changed the way we work as knowledge workers in particular. And so we have to embrace it. And so I can look to lots of examples in the past and go, hey, internet, if you didn't embrace the internet, how are you doing today? Probably not great, right?
Yeah.
Probably not around, in fact.
Yeah.
So if you didn't embrace mobile, how did that go? Right? Also not great. AI is similar. It's just probably more impactful and it's faster moving. As much as the internet changed the world, the pace that AI is changing the world is at a different level. And it displaces more knowledge workers potentially than prior technologies. Prior technologies gave more opportunity to knowledge workers. All of a sudden, AI is a little different. It can displace knowledge workers. And so what I ask folks to do, whether development and everywhere, is embrace it. If you don't embrace it, it's not going to go well. If we don't embrace it as a company at Tempo, it's not going to go well. If each function, each individual doesn't embrace it, it's not going to go well. When you do embrace it, you also have to then think differently. So embracing it isn't just, hey, I'm going to take this thing and make my job a little bit easier. You actually have to look at it a little bit differently and go, how would I do my job kind of from scratch? Let me re-architect it in the context of this technology. Fairly similar to like in the internet. If you were doing marketing, pretty much had to rethink about how you were going to sell stuff because the internet came along. And so AI is similar in that, but it affects every function, whether you're in development or finance or HR or whatever, sales, it affects everyone. And you've got to embrace it. And so like at Tempo, we're doing a bunch to go infuse that and immerse it. And not everybody will be able to do that. And that's going to be okay. But the people who do are going to be able to do things leaps and bounds better and more efficient than we were in the past.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Jevons paradox? The kind of the theory that like every major technological breakthrough has deleted, in its wake a number of job roles that were there to kind of support the old paradigm. But as that wave crashes, it then in turn creates a bunch of new kind of job roles. And what you're describing is a very cognitive shift from, here's my role, here's the tasks in my role, I do them well, I perform well, I get a kind of reward and job security, to a different kind of job role, which is much more metacognitive. It's much more engineering driven. It's much more like I look at this inefficient thing and I compound engineer that away using AI tools and stuff like that. But I'm just kind of wondering that theory, like, do you think that theory, Jevons paradox, holds weight, that AI will create a new classification of jobs and that will create a new source of jobs?
Good question. I think the answer, will be yes. I think one of the things that's going to be challenging is how do you get to it? So we don't know the answer yet, but you can argue. There's lots of arguments out there, including the CEO of Anthropic, just like yesterday I was listening to it, is AI is likely to displace a lot of early in career roles in technology. Well, without those early in career roles, how do you groom the later in career roles?
Yeah.
And so one of the things we're going to have to do is figure out education. So how do you educate people into it? And I almost think of I go into science fiction nowadays. And the reality is, like, science fiction starts becoming less fiction and more science over time. But you look at things like Star Trek and Star Trek Academy, right? Oh, well, you're going to have to, like, this concept of that learning for a longer period of time and to become like a leader. Think about one of the things I want people to do when they come to Tempo. I want them to be a builder. Like, that's an entry level job, I might argue. Well, it may take a little more training than what we've had historically, or different ways of training anyway. And when I say builder, I mean building agents, building agentic flows, right? Taking things and going, hey, why can't an agent do this thing? How do we evolve that agentic flow because AI continues to evolve very fast paced. And then all of a sudden we're going to be able to do things that we couldn't do, like, in the past. And I think that's where you get to the kind of the end of that paradigm is, all right, there's new things to do, and we need people to do those new things.
Yep. Gotcha. So there's kind of liminal state where it kind of, the benefit side of that kicks in, and we're kind of in that liminal state is what that's how I feel. It's like, yeah, too early to tell, but maybe, Jevons paradox will kick in. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of strategic portfolio management space. One of your gigs was at PlanView, which was a big player in kind of the portfolio management space. Like, I'd like to just kind of know, around that time and, before kind of Tempo and all that, like, what were you seeing in kind of traditional PPM that has informed what you're building at Tempo? Like, just kind of, let's start with the problem space a little bit.
So first off, I really enjoyed the time I had at PlanView, and it opened my eyes as a finance person to what I'm going to call like the last leg of what I don't have and I didn't have access to as a CFO, which is that intelligence around what we're doing from a product's perspective. We have it on like the vast majority of it. Like, I know how we're, as a CFO, finance, I know what's happening in sales and pipeline, anything that can be measured. The measuring a product engineer was always harder, right? Because it's not like, hey, how long did David work? That doesn't really tell me anything. Doesn't even, like, how much code did you create? Doesn't necessarily tell me anything either. Not by itself. You need to connect a bunch of dots to make sense of it. And that's really what the SPM is about, is about aligning strategy and work with outcomes, most specifically, I should say, around product and services. And it's typically the biggest dark spot, I'm going to call it, intelligence or strategic intelligence. That's what was interesting to it for me. So as a finance person by background, I always cared about the operations, like how do I connect numbers and the operations together. And so that the promise of what it can do I was in love with. It was always really hard though, because the approach from the legacy PPM, legacy SPM kind of vendors is hey, all we need to do is implement this giant piece of software, integrate with a whole bunch of stuff, get everybody in the company to change how they work, and it's going to go great. Very difficult to accomplish that. And so many times we would, almost every time I should say, customers would not be happy. They'd be happy with something, but they would not be happy with some things. And it was just a kind of vicious cycle that continued. And so it made growing really hard. It made customer sat really hard, it made employee satisfaction really hard, because we were always dealing with the issues versus the positives. And a core premise of that is that it's this kind of singular giant code base, giant implementation, kind of one size fits all. What's interesting about Tempo, the outside looking in and now inside owning, is we just don't go after it that way. We've broken it apart, the SPM, PPM capabilities, into individual applications that are consumable. And so our customers tend to have time to value as days or weeks. You don't even need a human to touch it most of the time when you get started. Now, as you go bigger and scale bigger, you need change management, things like that, a little bit more technical know-how. And we'll go do that with partners. And our partner ecosystem can go do that for our customers, because ultimately what we do, we're part of a solution. We're not the solution. And we don't want to be. It's not the customers don't want us to be necessarily that. They want us to integrate with a broader set of applications and help deliver an overall set of solutions. And we have partners that go do that. And we do that in such a way that our customers invariably get about value along the way, and then get to that bigger value at the end of what we call their SPM journey. And so that's really what we're trying to do. And it's gone exceptionally well, continues to go. The other benefit of that is we can innovate really quickly. So we can be adaptive because any surface area of our applications is small enough that if we have to rewrite it, that's not even that big of a deal. But we can augment it very easy compared to a large monolithic code base. And so at Tempo, we don't have that baggage, so to speak, of any sort of monolithic code base.
Well, that's great. I mean, a lot of people listening to this podcast are, enterprise architects or running architecture groups and stuff like that. And I just think that speaks to that a good architecture really is a capability that unlocks, a good strategy. And it's good to hear that from a CEO recognition. I'm sure whoever's doing architecture is very happy to hear that coming from your mouth.
I wish I was the architect of it. I'm not. I can't take credit for it.
Hey, yeah.
But I certainly carry it forward because it's amazing thing to be part of.
Yeah, no, that's nice. I love that a bit. I love this idea of having optionality in the architecture, and we won't go super deep on this, but like just the ability, like you said, if we need to quickly rewrite a small component, it's not a huge deal, or augment a small component, it's not a huge deal. So you kind of have that literal lowercase agility to do that stuff. I think everyone's really seeking that, especially people like portfolios that are full of legacy software. It's just such a nightmare, to try to kind of make those moves in these very rigid kind of systems and stuff. So good narrative, like good, really cool how, if the tech can support that strategy. So I want to come back to SPM. It's a term, strategic portfolio management. And I think we all know what a portfolio is, and we'll just kind of define it as like a grouping of goods and services or products that kind of tend to go together. It could be pointed at a market segment, could be pointed at a certain kind of customer, could be kind of domain driven around a certain set of problems or particular domain. And, we want to manage these things in groups, and we think we get some, economy of scale of doing that. But I wonder sometimes as I work with portfolios, in particularly on strategy, deployment, execution, stuff like that, what puts the S in SPM? What makes this portfolio management strategic to you?
Good question. So the customers and companies that fully adopt SPM, that strategy, like what we do, what SPM supports is the core strategy of the company. Think about what any given company does and their greater purpose. Typically, it's doing things for customers, and that is facilitated in the form of products and or services. And so what we're managing for customers and helping them to optimize is their ability to align their strategy, which is product and services, and deliver with actual outcomes. They're actually able to deliver those products, those services to the customers. So it's the most important thing that companies do. The most important thing at Tempo that we do is design and build and deliver our services, our software. And so it's hard for me to think of maybe a distribution company doesn't have that as much, if that's all they do is distribution. But generally speaking, the lifeblood of a company and its sustaining durable right to win is founded in SPM, right, in their products and services. And so it's core and central to what we do. It goes all the way and up and down the stack at any given company and across multiple functions. So it starts with, hey, what is our product strategy and our product roadmap, which is fascinating in AI world because you kind of think about it a little shorter term and a little bit looser. But we got to go, here's what it is. What are we going to deliver right now? Hey, across 10,000 engineers, how are we going to distribute that work? And then how do we track it, improve, optimize, so on and so forth, all the way down to an individual. What is that individual doing? And then how do we adapt? Because, hey, yesterday so-and-so said something, we've got to adjust our strategy or our tactics, at least relative to that strategy, our deployment. How do we measure so that we're putting our best resources on the most important things so that we are improving our lesser resources that continue to grow your up or out, so to speak? All that fits within SPM. So it's probably the most important thing that companies do from a long-term strategy execution perspective. And now with AI, it's not just long-term, it's short-term. Like the innovation cycles have gotten so short. That also means more coordination because we can deliver things so fast. How do we make sense of all those things that we can deliver?
Yeah. It feels like everyone's like the bottleneck shifting, like no duh, right? So delivery bottleneck, which is where we spent, 20 years more. I mean, just thinking about how to optimize that. And I think some companies got really good at it. And there was a lot of, practices and tooling and stuff like that kind of, thoughts on how to approach the job. But now that's no longer the bottleneck. So it feels like you're grabbing like a hunk of slime and it will squirt out of either side of your hand. So planning and portfolio management, all the kind of things you described, but also downstream. I mean, you can't just overwhelm a customer with 1,000 new features a week, right? So there's kind of like this feeling a return to like the build, measure, learn loop, and letting these experiments have a little bit more rigor and control and play out and see what actually kind of moves that outcome needle. Is that something Tempo helps out with? Is that something you're kind of experiencing with your customer base? Is those two bottlenecks shifting right to like customer fatigue and a bottleneck shifting left to inadequate planning strategy to planning kind of? So I'm just wondering if you're kind of experiencing this amongst your customers at Tempo, that bottleneck shifting, like it's kind of going left and right, right? I think that on the left side, you've got that AI takes that way, and it gets much easier to just ship as fast as you can. Now you've got on the right side of the value stream a problem of like overwhelming customers or this luxury that we never had that we're not used to of measurement and like, experimental rigor and stuff like that. Those are new things that need to get problems or that come into focus. And on the left side, you've got, the strategy to plan cascade. You've got the kind of, SPM matters and stuff like that. Obviously what you're talking about a lot is on the left side and being able to kind of really act and adapt quickly. Are you also experiencing things on the right side, like around how do we have some discipline about how much we ship? I'm kind of worried about that. Like, just because you can ship 1,000 features in a week doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
Right.
Great question. So it's shifting kind of all over the place. Yes, the bottleneck of how much we can build and how fast we can build it isn't so much there anymore. And to be clear, it's still there for companies who haven't fully adopted it. And that's most companies. And they're in this kind of, hey, let's try it out. Let's see what works and let's scale it. So most folks are in some kind of hybrid point right now and on their way to an end point over the next coming quarters, years to get there. But with that, even in that hybrid period, they have to go, all right, we really have to think about our strategy changing is dynamic. Like our product strategy in particular is dynamic. You don't do an annual products planning. You do at least quarterly, if not more often. And when I say quarterly product planning, it goes all the way up to the highest level of the strategy. And so being able to adapt really quickly up and down that stack, especially once you get to mid-sized companies up to enterprises, is work. It's difficult. You can't do it in spreadsheets. You need machine to speed that up. And so we do that. That's where SPM has gotten a tailwind from AI is, hey, the ability to coordinate where we're going to put our resources, what we're going to build in a coordinated fashion has ramped up in intensity. Because most products companies deliver require lots of different software, lots of different hardware, whatever it is. It's not like each stream of developer lives on its own. They all kind of come together into a strategy. And so that's one piece of it. And then you can go downstream and you go, all right, our ability to actually, whole product view of the world, our ability to implement, our ability to support, our ability to sell and market it, so on and so forth. All those have to be sped up also. So as soon as it's just like any other equation. As soon as you release one limiter, you find all the other limiters, and we're finding all those other limiters. And SPM touches all of that. SPM touches, hey, what are we doing in product engineering? But also, how do we then take that and commercialize it? How do we implement it? How do we service it? How do we give feedback to product to go, hey, this isn't working? And that's something that's had to change, right? People talk a lot about forward deployed engineers. You didn't talk about that a lot a year ago, but we talk about it a lot now because essentially companies are shipping things so fast. And people want them and they're willing to give feedback, but you have to be responsive to that feedback. So those are the types of things that are happening. And you're 100% right. We shifted that bottleneck from one place to lots of other places.
Yeah. It's fun in a way because it's like novel or, really mature companies have confronted, they got good at delivery and then they've had a more gentle introduction to those bottlenecks. But it feels like if you're not mature and maybe you got data hygiene check and governance check, and you're doing all the enterprise things that you need to do to let, the AI loose, right? Get the benefit. But if you hadn't dealt with delivery and gotten that kind of under control and manageable, these bottlenecks are going to be much more novel to you, forcing emerging practices, forcing like just new crises, right? That are kind of coming out of this. So I'd really like to just kind of understand a little bit more, maybe walk me through maybe a couple of use cases of how Tempo and what you guys are doing is kind of helping companies with these kinds of problems. Maybe one from a more of a higher up in the organization, maybe at a CPO level or portfolio manager level, and maybe one from like, what does it mean to me as like a senior engineer that's working with a product team?
Sure, I'll give you a couple, and we can keep talking through all of these you want. One is simply like, what should we be prioritizing? What are we working on? And I went from, hey, I can work on, or my team that is however many developers can focus on 10 things at once. Now I've gone from 8-person teams to 3-person teams. And instead of 10, I'm dealing with 30 plus. And those development cycles, instead of being, I don't know, call them 2-month sprints, they're like 4 weeks. And so I've upped my throughput, whatever that is, 5x. Well, trying to manage that using the same way I managed things in the past, impossible, literally impossible, because I need to decide what are we going to build and not build? And then how do I actually deploy resources? And by the way, resources, our deployment models are changing. So we're going, hey, this thing is really effective to have agents on. This one is not as effective to have agents on. So we've got teams of 2 or 3, and we've got teams of 6 because of how those things work. And by the way, that team of 6 in the future will be a team of 2 or 3 or something like that once AI catches up to that thing, or our ability to leverage AI in that. And so I'm trying to answer all those questions, and we're helping with that. The other part is then, great, now I'm able to go capacity plan and think about getting people in the right places, and we're building the right things. Let's just say we've accomplished that, which is easier said than done. How do I then decide where to put people versus agents? And how do I show the organization that those decisions are the right decisions to make? And that's attribution. So that's one of the things that we focused on, is attribution. How do we make sure that we understand the economic value of putting a person on it versus an agent, or persons and agents? And how do we measure then the outcomes and the economic value of those? And that's what we have customers that need to do that, and we do that with them. And we want to do that with data. And so, because ultimately, all these decisions I'm talking about will continue to be agentified decisions. Like even those portfolio decisions, but like our platform. So, just a little inside ball of Tempo is, historically and currently, we primarily work in the Atlassian marketplace, Atlassian Jira ecosystem. We're introducing our platform, which is agnostic, because it kind of has to be. We've been working towards this for a while. That is AI native, that allows us to look at all of those. Well, I need to be able to look across all the different work to make sense of all the things that we're doing and coordinate those, including what resources are we going to deploy. As we get better with agents, how do we redeploy people resources, or not? And I think that's probably actually gets to the hardest thing for leadership to deal with this AI world, is there's going to be a lot of scenarios where there's a not for the person. And I think, getting back to your question earlier, I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges we all have to think about solving for is, hey, if the forecasts of 50% of knowledge workers roles are going to go away in the next year or two, what do we do with that capacity and brain power to reorient them to something that's productive, incrementally productive? Because we can now go do different things. But I've got off to a tangent there. But yes, those are hopefully a couple examples.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder too, like I do think there's a pendulum nature to, the software, probably every space, but I've been in software for 30 years. So this is the space I know. And it feels like, we saw the agile pendulum swing to like really, small teams. And then we're seeing like this, AI pendulum swing that's over like to these micro teams and in smaller groups. But I think it's very likely that we'll find that we should be spending more time reviewing. We should be spending more time or we've been trained by usage of this tool to just kind of click, 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 accept PR, go, go, go. And that's going to create some, some visible failure stories that are going to, maybe bring it back. I'm not just from a labor, dynamics issue, but I guess what I'm saying is that so much change represented by this wave of technology that it feels like the one thing almost every organization that I've ever worked for has a deficient org design capability, because the org design motions are going to have to become almost an experimental regime, very quick. Let's try this out, see if it worked. Emergent practice. Okay, this works. Let's scale that out. Right. I sounds like word salad when I vocalize this, but I'm just wondering, like, you use the word adaptive a lot in your go to market. Is that what you're meaning? Is it like we have to adapt so quickly and kind of move this stuff around? So like all this change, right, is just nuts, right? And how do we kind of manage that? And you mentioned change management, but I think there's this broader like org design capability that I've never really seen, in very large scaled organizations, where they kind of are doing a continuous, almost gentle, like experiment data driven org design continuously, instead of one big every 3 years we do a big transformation when the leadership turns over, right? Is that a problem that you think Tempo addresses? Is that something that you think about? Is that something, when you're talking to leaders at your level, that you're hearing a pain around? I'm kind of almost trying to do some product research here.
It's not something that Tempo addresses. So we're not like on that people org kind of, we certainly think about capacity, and we'll think about capacity of agents versus capacity of humans. Okay. But what you're talking about is more fundamental to organizational design. And yes, leaders are thinking about it. I've been thinking about it. I'm talking with my leadership team and extending it further beyond that, because it is different. In the past, it was, hey, we need strategy and enablement, empowerment, and inspiration, all the things the CEO does and the ELT does. And then you need, as you start to get to middle management, you need to go, hey, I need to connect strategy with execution. And then we got people who do whatever it is. So different skill sets to different parts of the organization. And then in sales, it's these skills. And finance, it's these skills. Agents have those skills now. Fundamentally different. And so the question, and this is very different for me. Like in the past, I'm a big fan of certain things, of axioms, so to speak. It's an evolution, not a revolution. Well, that's not the case anymore. It's not really an evolution. Like right now, it's a revolution. And so the construct that I'm using or testing right now, and I'm sure it'll change a little bit over time, is 4 categories of work. And those 4 categories are architecture. So that's essentially what I do. It's what my direct reports do. We architect all the things we need to do as a company, as a function. We then orchestrate. We do a little bit of orchestration, and the next layer down below me does another orchestration. There's more below that. And everybody has a mix of these things. So you've got architect, orchestrate work, and builder. Builder is the single most important thing that we're doing right now, which is, in builder, it's building agents and agentic workflows. And it's across everything we do as a company. And then the last piece is field operations. So field operations are all the things that people need to do that I didn't cover already in architecture and orchestration. It's sales, it's talking to customers and customer success. Essentially, it's dealing with all the things that agents can't do when you have an agent first approach, or an agent AI centric approach. It may be as simple as those 4. There's going to be subcategories, especially in that last one. But that's a very different construct than how I have ever thought about human capital management in the past.
Oof. It's fun. I mean, I've chosen fun. I hit the fun button, Vic. I'm gonna choose this as an interesting challenge, but man, it is a lot of challenges.
It is. And the builder part, the thing that I think is really fun is when you get actually get into building stuff, it is eye-opening how much you can do agentically. And I think a lot of people have a fear of getting over that. Some of the smartest people at Tempo, we've had to push them over that. But once you do it and get immersed into it, a whole new world opens up. It's almost like going diving for the first time and like how much hey, there's some stuff underneath the water, but you can't appreciate it until you actually see it and you go, wow,
Right.
my
Right.
whole world just opened up. AI and that builder construct is not dissimilar.
Yeah. I mean, I could relate to the diving thing. I think the first time when I got certified, it was in Thailand, and it was like, all right, jump in, we're diving. It's not a pool kind of scenario. And I just remember after that dive being like, wow, this is probably the closest I'll ever get to space travel. It was just so particularly good analogy. I want to call that one out. So yeah, in my notes here, I've got AI inside the product and the orchestration problem it creates. We certainly touched on that with like how the kind of the bottleneck is shifting all around from just maybe more focused on delivery, which is where we've been orbiting for the last, 10, 15 years. But like, I'd like to just kind of understand, what is the orchestration problem? Like, how are you kind of perceiving that at Tempo, and how are you trying to come up with solutions around that thing?
Yep. Again, a couple of orchestration problems. One is, what are we working on? So the competitive dynamic landscape, it changes so fast. One of the modules that will actually exist in our platform that we'll introduce to the world in just a short order here, this is our AI native platform, is going to be market and competition. Because to do product work, you've got to be aware of market and competition. And now you need to be aware of it in a much more real time perspective. And to have that feed as a signal directly into what you're deciding to build, stop building, accelerate, so on and so forth. So it starts there at your kind of strategic roadmap level. And then you go, all right, now how are we going to deploy resources? Because we're going to be looking at the signals and going, this is behind, this is ahead, this should be canceled, this should be not, so on and so forth. And so we're going to be orchestrating then like deciding where we put resources, agent and people. So there's both of those constructs in there. And then change management. So, hey, great, I've got this system, it's fully automated and it is on all the time and it's constantly readjusting what David and Vic are working on. So 5 minutes ago, the system told David to work on this. Now it says switch to this. Now we can't really do that either. So you got to do kind of change management. You can automate change management with AI also and just go, hey, we've made a shift here. Here's why. And then just cascade that all the way down. And again, automatically, so that by the time it gets to you and I, in this example, you and I are developers, we know what we should be doing, why we're doing it, and we're not getting switched every week. We can put parameters on it so that it happens in an appropriate kind of time regulation perspective. But all of that orchestration is very difficult right now. Like we've primarily worked in the Jira ecosystem historically. We're entering all the others. And so linear is a great example. Like if you go look at some of the linear boards, like we have so many of these things happen, we don't know how to coordinate them. And so it's that coordination. Once you get to a certain scale, you have to just coordinating, managing the traffic. Like, hey, if I was a small business, I was running a small town or medium-sized business, running a medium town. Now I'm still a medium-sized business, but my town is like a city or a state because of how much throughput I have. And I don't have the ability necessarily to manage that without some kind of technology that augments it. And that's what we try.
Yeah, really. I love that vision. I love you started with the what should we do? Because it feels like out of all the bottlenecks shifting, the biggest light's kind of going to be shined on this kind of outcome impact ability to measure that stuff, right? And it's like, so kind of a nerd noir, we were always like, flow, yes, but outcomes, as well. Like you have to kind of be focused on those things, knowing that you may have multiple shots on goal till you start to see the needle kind of move in the right direction. And that's where you should be spending your time. That's where leaders should be kind of incenting, hey, I want to see you generate insights and learning and make adjustments to your roadmap accordingly, or make adjustments to your smaller scope bets, your experiments accordingly. That's a new set of behaviors that support that kind of, that drive that orchestration demand. Because now you've got to have the tooling and the apparatus, your rig needs to be set up to do that very, very, very quickly. So that's coming online, right? It feels like part of the Tempo value prop as well.
Yeah. And like reality using your flow will continue to flow with those outcomes because those outcomes reinforce, hey, we should go do this again, we should adjust this, so on and so forth. I love the concept of flow and flow state, and you need a bunch of systems and processes, ideally relatively simplified, to make that flow state possible.
Yeah, great. So let's talk a little bit about the Tempo culture and how you've, kind of pivoted over the pandemic and built and run a truly remote first software company. You're dedicated to this. I know you're passionate about this topic, but yeah, I just kind of love to kind of understand like how do you structure this group of people that are kind of aimed at like what's the Tempo culture like? Yeah, give us a peek inside.
So I started with those axioms I mentioned
Yep.
earlier, called the leadership axiom: visibility, alignment, accountability, and support, enable, and empowerment. And then again, I also share with folks, I'm really transparent, first off. Like, I want to make sure everybody understands why decisions are made, what the decisions are made for, who's making them, so on and so forth, and how to provide input on them. Because one of the things I can guarantee is I'm not the best person to make a lot of the decisions, which is why that last axiom is so important. Right? Somebody who's close to a customer, a specific customer, is going to be better at making decisions about that customer than I am. I will hopefully be useful in the bigger sense and a broader sense of customers, but as you probably well know, once you get to like an actual detailed thing that needs to be solved, the persons who have visibility to it are going to be better at informing that. And so start there with those axioms, and then it's decision making, it's principles. I'm a big principle and framework person because my decision making is limited. I want to be able to enable an organization to make decisions in a similar fashion, regardless of who's making that decision. And that requires these principles and frameworks. And so I start with some of them, share them with the organization. I have another one that's called scalability principles. I share it all the time, which is simplify, standardize, consider the customer experience, and sustainability. If we're making decisions that align with those four things, probably pretty good decisions. Generally, though, you have to make a little bit of trade-offs as you go through those things. But lots of frameworks like that. And then I always encourage each of the functions to put them together from themselves. Importantly, at the leadership level, there's a combination of been there, done that. So we're not scientificating on all fronts. So I look for a bunch of been there, done that in my team. Very people oriented. Software company, people is the core of that. It's now people and agents. So it's a combination of those two things now, but you have to have a little bit of been there, done that, people orientation. And then the last piece there is you have to be like willing to and interested in experimenting, because to innovate and grow, you have to experiment. If you're comfortable with experimenting or you're leaning into experimenting, you're comfortable with failing. So you got to be okay with that as well. Those are probably some of the core capabilities and characteristics I look for in my leadership team. And I've been fortunate to put together an exceptionally strong leadership team. And 100% new with one exception on my leadership team, and 100% the right people to do the role as well, each of those roles. But we are all aligned in that. And so if I'm not in the room and our CRO, Marie's making a decision, I'm highly confident it's the right decision. Same thing for Kevin, our CPO, or Shams, our CTO, so on and so forth. And so hopefully that's helpful. The last piece I do think about there, it's actually the first piece, but it's not the last one I mentioned now, is employee engagement. I can argue as a CFO background that employee engagement is the single most important metric at a software company, maybe at any company. Because employees are the ones that make things work. Like when you think about for what we're trying to do for our customers, our employees ideate, they build it, they sell it, they support it, so on and so forth. And I want to make sure that employee engagement is as high as possible. Employee engagement, likewise, is one of the very few things where there's a definitive bi-directional win. So if I'm an engaged employee, I'm generally happy at work. Spend about half my waking hours doing work, which means that's going to filter then or bleed into my non-working time. Because I'm happy at work, it will mean I'm tend to be happier as a person. If I'm unhappy at work with half my time, I tend to be less happy as a person. So there's a positive feedback loop on the professional and personal side. Those are hard to find in the work world, but employee engagement is one where I firmly believe it's like definitively a positive reinforcement on the personal side. And to me, that's really important for the sustainability element of anything I do.
Yeah, I love how you tied it back to your axioms. I love that you think in principles as well. I'm same, right? Brother from another mother. I got to ask you though, because this is something that we face in our practice a lot. Is, you've distilled it down to a pretty memorable set of beats, right? And it's kind of these are not overwrought heavy frameworks. They're pretty lightweight, and there's a lot of, I almost think of them as like enabling constraints. It's like, here's what I want you to think about, right? What is the comms motion to get those principles to the state where people are repeating them back to you and actually their behaviors are aligned to those principles? Like, how much as a leader do you need to communicate and drive these principles into the dialogue until they start to take root? What is what do you have any little tricks or tips around communicating these principles into existence, into behavior?
Great question. Because if it's out of sight, it is out of mind. And so it's sort of like a marketing campaign to a degree. You got to see it on a semi-regular basis. Regular basis, then semi-regular basis. Regular basis for adoption, semi-regular basis for maintenance. Given the fact that we have new employees, constantly entering the company, sort of like has to be pretty front and center. We do a handful of things. One is I will repeat these things on a regular basis. So and I will apologize. Hey, you're going to hear me on repeat, right? And so the company is used to it. Like, all right, Vic's mentioning that again.
Mm-hmm.
But others will then bring it. If I'm doing it, I'll go, hey, here's an example. Hey, I found this. You were right with this, or somebody did this, whatever it is. And that's when it starts to actually take hold, is when others are using it. And so the place that I ask for it to happen occur the most, and so others to carry that water, is with leadership team. So we have we call executive leadership team, which is my direct reports, and then we have a senior leadership team, which is a broader set. And that's where I talk about it the most. That leaders are leading and using that same verbiage, the same language. We also use our values in those conversations and some other things in the industry context. But that's where you do it, and you have to kind of drip feed it. Like, I don't start with, here are the 10 frameworks I want to introduce. Like, when my first call with a company, I introduced 2 frameworks, the axioms and the scalability principles. Later on, I then introduced other frameworks, or had others introduce frameworks, and I'd reinforce them. And so you just kind of have to do it slowly and decide which ones are going to be the most critical. So it's almost like an upside down triangle. That foundation for us is leadership axioms. The next level is things like scalability principles and data-driven decision-making. And so employee engagement. Employee engagement, by the way, shows up in that very bottom one. But yeah, you do have to repeat it. And you need to make it visceral with examples. That is the best way for it to stick, is sharing examples.
Yeah, I think that on that note, such a great piece of advice, in that it supports our advice to our clients. So I am definitely going to clip this and send it around. But yeah, over communicate till you start to hear it back, right? And I love the gentle drip idea. That's a good analogy for me. So yeah, on that note, Vic, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be on the pod. It was a great conversation. So many great ideas, so many things I need to dig into, check out. It's going to be long show notes, but I want to thank you again.
Hey, well, thanks for having me, David. This discussion, every time I talk about something, some of the things we've talked about, we've covered a lot. I learn and I was taking notes. I'm like, oh, I got to change that.